Elite Facts presents
10 creepy facts about Victorian London.
10.
Vignette. So back then there was no internet, no television, and no cinemas. The only form of entertainment was to just dress up in odd clothing and pose in front of your family while taking turns. This sounds innocent, but can you imagine your grandmother dressing up as a geek wood nymph and posing on a table in the living room while everyone claps and applauds? No, you can't, and you shouldn't. The idea is just downright creepy, but there was nothing else to do for fun, so this activity was perfectly normal during the Victorian era.
9.
Food. Nowadays, England has some pretty decent food, but if you even dared to look at what was on the menu back in the Victorian era, odds are you'd be blowing chunks in the nearest bathroom just thinking about it. Back in those days, there was no such thing as waste, as the Victorians loved offal and ate virtually every part of an animal. Every part. Now, this may not seem entirely creepy if you are a food fanatic, but for the average person, the idea of supping on a bowl of brains, heart, or testicles is just plain nauseating, to say the very least. Another famous dish from the Victorian era was turtle soup. The turtle was considered above all else for its green jello-like fat, which was used to flavor the soup made from the long-boiled stringy flesh of the animal. Turtle soup is still considered a delicacy today, but it's just kind of messed up considering that turtles these days are commonly kept as pets.
8.
Poorhouses. Poorhouses were facilities created by the government where the poor, infirm, or mentally ill could live. These facilities were filthy and always filled with other people that were deemed unwanted by society. Many of the people who lived in the poorhouses were required to work to contribute to the cost of their board, and it was not uncommon for whole families to live together with other families in the communal environment.
7.
Memento Mori. Death photography was better known in Victorian times by the Latin phrase Memento Mori, which means remember, you shall die. In the Victorian era, photography was an invention that was still in development. Get it? And it was considered to be extremely costly if you wanted a photo session. When a loved one died, their relatives would sometimes have a photograph taken of the corpse in a pose that, in most cases, would include other family members. For a vast majority of Victorians, this was the only time they would spring for a photograph. And in these photographs, the effect of life was sometimes added by either propping the subject's eyes open before taking the photo or painting pupils onto the photographic print after the picture was developed, and many early images have a rosy tint added to the cheeks of the corpse. When it came to photos of deceased adults, they were most commonly posed in chairs or even braced on specially designed frames. Flowers were also a common prop in post-mortem photography. It's all just way too creepy to even comprehend. Count yourself lucky we don't still do this nowadays.
6.
Pea soupers. The one thing people tend to think of when they think about Victorian-era London is the thick fog that engulfed it. London during the Victorian era was famed for its pea soupers. These were fogs so thick that you could barely see through them. These pea soupers were caused by a combination of fog from the River Thames and smoke from the coal fires that were a very important part of life back in those days. Even though they're most commonly associated with the Victorian era, London had suffered from these pea soupers for centuries. In 1306, King Edward I banned coal fires because of the smog, and in 1952, a reported 12,000 Londoners died due to the smog, causing the government to pass the Clean Air Act, which created smog-free zones. The Victorian atmosphere was greatly enhanced by the thick smog, and it was due to this creepy environment that the acts of people like Jack the Ripper were made possible.
5.
Impact of Gothic literature. Aside from the creepy pastime of dressing up and posing for the family, or with the family after you're dead, the only other form of entertainment people had back then was Gothic literature. Although entertaining, it did have an impact on people's daily lives, as novels such as Dracula made people legitimately afraid of their dead loved ones coming back as vampires. So scared, in fact, that they would bury their deceased family members face down, so that if they were to come back to life, they would keep digging further into the earth instead of up and out of the casket. That was the logic anyway. In many instances, they also placed a cage over their grave. Paranoid. People were easy to scare back then.
4.
Boracic acid in milk. In 1882, tests on 20,000 milk samples showed that a fifth of it had been adulterated. However, much of this was done not by manufacturers, but by the buyers themselves. Boracic acid was thought to purify the milk, removing the sour taste from milk that had gone past its prime. Well, people who did this were wrong. Small amounts of boracic acid can cause nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. Even more particularly dangerous was what the boracic acid concealed. Before pasteurization, milk often contained bovine TB, which would flourish in the bacteria-friendly environment created by the substance. Bovine TB damaged internal organs and the milk drinker's spines, leading to horrific spinal deformities.
3.
Grave digging for greed. During those days, old coffins were smashed and sold as firewood to poor peasants at a cheap price. This is just one of the many examples of grave diggers looking to take advantage of both cemetery overcrowding and the poor in need.
2.
Surgery. Even today, surgery is still a pretty scary thought, but in the Victorian era, it was a complete nightmare no matter what surgery you were getting. Back then, most patients died during and after surgery anyway, so if you needed it, odds are you'd have to write your will in advance. Regardless of whether or not you survived, going through the surgery itself was pure hell, because back then there was no anesthetic, no painkillers to relieve the pain afterwards, and no electric equipment to reduce the duration of an operation. Listen, here's an example of what a patient had to go through. Just imagine a fully conscious man who's already in excruciating pain due to a badly broken leg he suffered after falling between a train and the platform at nearby King's Cross. Now, as he lies on the operating table in the operating room, he looks over in total horror at the collection of knives, saws, and needles that lie alongside him. Obviously, the patient can't move or anything in order to keep the surgeon from botching an incision, so the patient has to be tied down by liston clamps to keep his hands across his thigh. Back then, they had to witness themselves getting diced and cut open, and sometimes even seeing their own body parts getting removed, which back then was far too common of a treatment. As we said, pure nightmare.
1.
Jack the Ripper. So, as if everything we previously mentioned wasn't scary enough, how about having a mysterious serial killer roaming Whitechapel, making people's lives even worse than it was already? London was terrorized during the Victorian era by the mysterious Jack the Ripper. Using the previously mentioned pea soup fog as a way of covering his identity and sneaking up on his victims, the Ripper's death toll tallied up to 5 or more prostitutes working in the East End. Newspapers, whose circulation had been growing during this era, bestowed widespread and enduring notoriety on the killer because of the savagery of the attacks and the failure of the police to capture the murderer. Because the killer's identity has never been confirmed, and most likely never will be, the legend surrounding the murders has become a combination of genuine historical research, folklore, and pseudo-history.
Don't forget to like us and subscribe for more elite facts.